Hi, thanks for joining us today on Connect and Collaborate, the voice of the Colorado Business Roundtable. I'm Jeff Wasden, pinch hitting today on the final weekend of the Rockies regular season for Alex, your normal on-air host on our series Election Watch 2018 with the Denver Business Journal. Joining me in studio today, Mr. Ed C. Lover.
Thank you. I'll be pitching today. Thank you.
Pitching. Good, good.
I guess that makes me batting.
Yes.
Pitching and batting, we're in great shape here. And that other voice you heard was Mr. Phil Weiser, the Democrat nominee for Attorney General. Phil, thanks for joining us today in studio.
It's great to be here. Hope I bat as well as Arenado.
Yeah, I love that. Good. Yes, we all hope you do, and we hope the Nationals roll over for us this series as we can close out and end up in the playoffs. What a great opportunity to sit down together with our listeners and the business community and talk about the upcoming elections and the statewide ballot initiatives. And this month, we're obviously focused on the Attorney General's race. For those that tuned in yesterday, obviously the show was posted on YouTube Live with the Republican nominee, George Brockler. That show will air live next Tuesday, or will air next Tuesday. The YouTube video is up, but we're excited to have you listening in to Phil Weiser live on air and on YouTube. Phil, let's jump in with a nice, easy softball here to get you started, since we're using some baseball analogies or a slow-hanging curve here. Talk a little bit about you, your background, and your decision to run for Attorney General for the state of Colorado.
When I was in college, I had two loves: sports broadcasting, and public service. Needless to say, I didn't go the broadcasting or sports route. I've gone into public service, which took me to law school. It took me to Colorado, where I moved after law school to work for a judge here. I then worked on the Supreme Court for Justice Byron White, a Coloradan and an icon in civil rights worlds. He was a deputy attorney general to Bobby Kennedy before becoming a Supreme Court justice, not to mention a great football player. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, another icon for equal rights and equal justice for all. I then worked in the Justice Department, and around 20 years ago, moved back to Colorado, because when I moved here the first time, I discovered what many of us have discovered, which is, why would you live anywhere else? And for the last 20 years, I've been a professor of law and telecommunications at the University of Colorado. I've been the dean of the law school for 5 years. I've also been very involved in public service here, co-chairing Bill Ritter's Innovation Council, helping to found efforts like Startup Colorado. And then I also work for President Obama on the transition in the Justice Department as a Deputy Assistant Attorney General, and in the White House as a Senior Advisor on Technology Innovation. So I've got a varied background in the law, in business and technology, and I want to be the lawyer for the people of Colorado. If I'm going to serve this time, it's because the people elect me, and I'll tell you, this is the hardest job interview I've ever been on.
No doubt. Interesting that you mentioned the Supreme Court in light of what's happening today in D.C. and the Brett Kavanaugh confirmations. Any comments on that as you sit back and have experienced that personally in your background, how you feel about what's playing out in D.C.?
I have lots of comments. We are living in a time that is a threat to the rule of law and to principle and the institutional legitimacy of the Supreme Court. Without Jeff Flake having had a very impactful conversation, the plan was to ram through a vote in the midst of very serious charges by someone who I found credible. Jeff Flake apparently had second thoughts that I appreciate. His second thought was, we need an investigation, because this is a big deal. When you put someone in the Supreme Court, it's a life appointment. It's important the public have a confidence level that the person deserves that position. There's no reason to rush this through. The American Bar Association, along with lots of other experts, said, have a real investigation. Ask witnesses. Make an effort to determine whether or not this is someone who's fit to serve. That's now going to happen. The fact that it almost didn't happen pains me, because I worked at the Supreme Court, and at its best, it is absolutely a forum for principle. It seeks to find the right answer, even to hard questions. The more the Supreme Court becomes ideologically charged, the more people think it's another branch of politics, the more our constitutional tradition is in jeopardy. And part of what's motivated me to run for Attorney General is I believe in the rule of law. I believe in our Constitution, and I want to make the system work based on principle, not based on partisan objectives.
So what led you to jump into this particular race then? Why AG? Why now?
The path of service that I've had before at the federal level involved being appointed. And now that I'm running for office, I can tell you being appointed is much easier. I recommend that form of service if you have the option.
So it's a PSA from Phil Weiser
exactly.
For anybody out there thinking about running for office.
And the other PSA, by the way, and they are two sides of the same coin, We need people running for office who want to serve because they care about our community. Anyone wants to run for office, in all seriousness, please reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to anyone, happy to encourage and support them. We need people stepping forward. I've always known, because I care about public service, that if you want to serve, you might have to run yourself someday. Had Hillary Clinton won the presidential election, I might have had a third time that I'd work in the federal government, whether Justice Department, Federal Trade Commission, the White House, places I had been involved with before. We're not in that world. We're in a world now the states matter greatly. The states are an important check on our federal government. We get to find our own destiny, a destiny in Colorado that, I love what you said, connect and collaborate. We get to connect and collaborate with each other to solve problems in a way that's a model for our nation. I talked to others who I thought would be great candidates, and I said, would you run? Because we need a good person. I'll help you. One of those individuals is now my campaign treasurer, John Walsh, said, Phil, you need to run. Ken Salazar, former attorney general here and a Democrat, said to me, Phil, you got to do this. And from day one, he's been with me, endorsed me. So I got a lot of encouragement. I thought long and hard about this. This is a hard thing to do. It is also an inspiring thing to do. And what people told me, and it's proved true, this is the best learning opportunity to show up across our state. I've been to every county to listen to people and learn and build relationships. I believe it will make me a better attorney general having done this.
So think about after election, if you are chosen by the voters of Colorado to serve as our state's next AG, what are some of your top goals? What do you want to accomplish if elected, Phil?
I have several. Let me start with equal rights for all, protecting the rule of law. I want to talk about fighting for opportunities for everyone. And then third, I'll talk about protecting our land, air, and water. First, defending our rights and equal justice for all. I mentioned my time working with Justice Ginsburg and Justice White. That commitment to civil rights is something that has characterized my whole career. I believe in our essential freedoms of this country. That includes the rule of law is applied equally to everybody. So, for example, if you're LGBTQ, you should have the right to be served wherever you show up. You should be protected from employment discrimination. If you're a woman, you should have access to birth control and the choice to whether to have an abortion. And if you're a person of color or an immigrant, you shouldn't be discriminated against because of your background. That's what we in Coloradans believe in. I will fight for everyone to have access to opportunities without regard to what their background is. And that's something I'm deeply passionate about. And I worry about the current environment where we see a lot of more hating and a lot of threats to this principle of equal justice under law. Second, fighting for opportunities for everybody. We have to recognize a lot of people are hurting, and I want to help people, both as consumers, as workers, and there's a lot that our AG can do about this. One important issue is access to health care. We have a protection under federal law, the Affordable Care Act, which says if you have a pre-existing condition, your insurance company can't discriminate against you. One conversation that I had on the road was in Alamosa with Honey, who talked about her child, whose life has been protected, indeed saved, by this provision. Our federal Justice Department, they're not standing up to defend and enforce this provision. They're seeking to undermine it. I would fight for access to health care, protect this important protection. Also, a lot of people I've met around this state, the opioid epidemic is a real threat to lives and families. There are pharmaceutical companies who've lied to people, made a bunch of money. They need to be held accountable. We will win that lawsuit against them. I will then use it to help support drug treatment all across Colorado. That's an important way to help people get on with their lives. We should not be putting people in jail who are opioid users. And right now, that is exactly what we're doing. In Alamosa County, 92% of the people there are opioid users. And the sheriff says, I can't help them. There's no drug treatment. Finally, protecting our land, air, and water. The reality of climate change is having a huge effect on our state. Look at the droughts. Look at the wildfires. We in Colorado pioneered a methane rule to address methane emissions, which is a both pollutant and contributor to climate change. The EPA took our rule and adopted it nationwide, telling Colorado, don't worry, your company's already complying with it. But for Colorado, this was a great thing, this rule, because 2/3 of our methane emissions comes from surrounding states. Well, our Attorney General didn't fight for our rule. She actually fought against it. Now we have a federal government trying to get rid of this protection. I'll fight to keep it. And finally, managing our water. With less water, less storage, we need to be more innovative and creative. I'll be an Attorney General who leads on how we manage our water so that we don't face these terrible choices that can include destroying agricultural communities like what happened in Crowley County.
Well, it's great. I think you just previewed about 6 different topics we want to go into here.
Awesome.
We're going to hit them all.
But the first
I guess
one,
I'm batting 750 maybe?
don't get ahead of
500?
yourself here. I could throw you a curveball. Yes, but all right, let's see how far we can take this analogy. You mentioned the idea of I will win the lawsuit against Purdue Pharma.
Yes.
And that was a question that's been brought up. That was one of the more activist things that Cynthia Kaufman actually has done as AG, is get involved in that. How do you view the role of AG in terms of activism? Some people say, look, this is not a place where you go after companies, go after issues like this. Some say it is. What do you think?
When it comes to helping Colorado, whether the opioid epidemic, whether addressing rising healthcare costs, or whether it's water, I will be actively engaged and innovative to advance the interests of all Coloradans. And the Attorney General's office has tools that are around protecting people who are hurt. What Purdue Pharma did was evil. And I don't say that lightly. I'm very pro-business. I've been a big leader in the entrepreneurial community. But if you lie to people to make money and you know that you're hurting them, shame on you. And for responsible businesses, it's a terrible thing to have these irresponsible companies out there because it hurts everybody. It hurts confidence, it hurts trust, and then you have to think about competing against someone who's breaking the rules. They need to be held accountable, and we need to work hard to do right for all the people who've been hurt. So I'm actively committed to that agenda, which is a pro-Colorado agenda.
And let me ask, just to follow that up, I can't ask about, what businesses do you go after, because that's clearly a case-by-case basis. But in terms of the federal government, there's been a lot of action by AGs across the country to stop the rollbacks of certain rules. Where do you view the role of the Colorado AG's office in that? Do you step in? Do you let others do that?
This is a very important point. First and foremost, my test is, how does it affect Coloradans? So take the Affordable Care Act. I talked about Honey, who I met in Alamosa, and how much she cares and needs this protection for people with pre-existing conditions. The effort to undermine that law, not defend it, which was passed by Congress, upheld by the Supreme Court, I find deeply problematic, and it is an important safeguard of our system that we can have states and state AGs fight for the rule of law. So that's an example I'd step in. The methane rule is another rule. The methane rule was based on the work we did here in Colorado, which provides a great benefit to Coloradans. And federal agencies don't get to just do whatever they want willy-nilly. They're subject to the rule of law. And a particular law called the Administrative Procedures Act says you can't just roll back regulations and protections without a reason justification. One of the methane rules, there are actually 2, because one is at the EPA, one's at the Interior Department. One of it requires anyone who's licensing federal land to capture the methane, not emit it. And that actually leads to more royalties to the government. And so getting rid of this rule, which is feasible to do the rule, it's working well. We proved that in Colorado. It protects the environment having this rule. It makes money for the federal government. If the Interior Department can't offer any reason to do it, other than we want to do a favor for some companies, that's not good enough a reason. And the check on that can either be Congress, if they're doing their oversight function, or can be states and state AGs. And so when something hurts Colorado, I'll step up to protect Coloradans.
Phil, as part of your third goal, you mentioned protecting land, air, and water. This race is garnering significant attention, obviously, from the oil gas community. How does an AG wiser handle these legal challenges and the states versus local rights around oil gas?
It's a really important question. And let me start with a little background about our current Attorney General, whose role here I found disappointing, to say the least. First off, local communities and a lot of people in local communities are concerned about the public health and safety. They've wanted to develop protections and oversight. What has our Attorney General's office do? Most famously, sue the Boulder County Commission. And here's the part that really gets me, without talking to them first. I've told everybody, unless you're a fly-by-night company who can't be trusted because you might pull your assets elsewhere, I will never, ever sue you without talking to you first. And that's quadruply true when you're a fellow governmental entity who deserves our respect. What I want to do is set up a special unit in the Attorney General's office to advise, counsel, and support local governments on how they can manage oil and gas development to guard against any unsafe development. And that's expertise that a lot of local governments don't have. They deserve the law office for the people to be there on their side, not a threat of suing them in court. And that's a big change I will make. I believe that's better for the industry, because the industry, to be successful long term, needs a social license to operate. If communities can't trust that the oil and gas development happening in their vicinity is safe and protects the public health, I don't believe that's going to go well for the industry long term. The other point I would say is at the state level, the Attorney General is the lawyer for the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. The AG is the lawyer for every single state entity and agency there is, whether it's insurance, oil and gas, water. It's a powerful law office for the people. What has our Attorney General done there? She's given bad legal advice to the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission, effectively telling it it had no authority to oversee or restrict oil and gas development where the public health, safety, and environment were concerned. That's generated a case that's got a lot of attention called the Martinez case. It all comes from the fact that our Attorney General gave bad legal advice when the commission has this authority, should be having a chance to exercise it. Again, our governor, on both these two issues I mentioned, looked at the actions of our Attorney General and said, what are you doing? You're not representing the people. We need an Attorney General to represent the people, both at the local level and the state level. I'll do that.
So I want to segue into the Martinez case here. Two things. I want you to do your best to explain this to our listeners, because Jeff and I know what this is. I bet a lot of people don't. But second, I also want you to answer this question. The COGCC asked Cynthia Kaufman to appeal the decision that went in the Martinez case, and she did. Why would you as an AG not listen to your client?
Well, this is a great question, because you got to roll back the onion one more layer. Before the COGCC did anything, they asked their lawyer for legal advice. The lawyer gave bad legal advice. At the very beginning of this case was a legal question. What is, and this gets to your other question, what is the legal authority of the COGCC to consider petitions that would restrict oil and gas development? Now, what's hard here is there's two questions. This is a issue that only lawyers can love. One is jurisdictional.
Heard you get paid more if you do it right.
There you go. One is jurisdictional and one is the merits. This case is all about the jurisdiction. That is the only legal issue. Does the commission have jurisdiction to consider the following petition? Now, this is where people get tied up. The merits of the petition is not an issue right now. Now, what the petition was a request by a number of individuals to ban all oil and gas development, and their theory was oil and gas development contributes to climate change. The reason that the merits get tricky for people is, as people who followed the science of this, we've had a massive substitution of coal for natural gas. That substitution has actually lowered our carbon footprint, particularly when you think about restricting methane emissions, which is the big concern of gas development. That means the merits of this are obviously very open to question. But that wasn't the issue here. The issue wasn't the merits. It's not about the merits. It's about whether or not, as a legal principle, the authority exists in the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission to decide to restrict oil and gas development based on the public health, safety, and environment. And the initial legal opinion that got this whole thing going, and then to answer your other question, Ed, that pushed this all the way to the Colorado Supreme Court was a legal view that I disagree with, that authority did not exist. This shows you how important the Attorney General's office is, because when you have bad legal advice to start with, it can generate a whole series of problems. And you could substitute other issues, water, sports gambling, whatever the issue is. If you have thoughtful legal advice and good judgment at the outset, that can prevent a lot of brain damage and problems down the road.
I think anybody that's following your campaign probably has a pretty clear idea of where you stand on this current administration and President Trump. AG Sessions has not been part of your campaign, but I'm guessing you share some of the similar views about him and his administration and what he's doing as a president. Talk a little bit about your role as a state AG as it relates to the federal government and what's happening in D.C.
I'm the lawyer for all Coloradans. I will protect you, including from things that happen in Washington or that could happen in Washington. Let me take one example that a lot of people are asking about, marijuana. We've decided that we want marijuana to be legal, and we are allowing it to be sold with tax revenues helping, for example, college scholarships in Pueblo, mental health treatment in Eagle County. That is an experiment we're working on to make work. Jeff Sessions, someone who you just mentioned, has a different agenda and viewpoint about marijuana. He wants to go back to putting marijuana users in jail. I will fight him on that using whatever tools we can, most importantly, our 10th Amendment rights, state rights, to choose our own destiny. You could substitute other issues for this. Immigration. The city of Denver has said we don't want to have people worry about testifying in court if they're not documented, because we need them to testify. It keeps us safer. I would defend the right of Denver from being commandeered by the federal government to do work that it doesn't want to do. The other side of this is federal protections we count on, and I've mentioned now a couple times the Affordable Care Act. People care about this point, about do I have protection against discrimination if I have a pre-existing condition? You need your lawyer, our Attorney General, to stand up against Jeff Sessions, who is seeking to undermine this important protection. What a lot of people need to know, we have this system of checks and balances, and there's not only Congress as check and balance, there are also the states. And so my answer is I can be a check when things happen in Washington that threaten what we care about here in Colorado.
And let me, just because we've got a short amount of time before the break, I think this one will take a little less time. You mentioned the idea of sports gambling.
You don't want to get into water law in 2 minutes?
Not in 2 minutes, so we'll do that after the break here. This is an issue that's almost surely going to come up before the Colorado legislature next year. What would your advice as AG be? Is sports gambling something we can legalize in the state? Do you agree with Cynthia Kaufman's interpretation on this?
The burden of being a lawyer is you have to do the work first. And I'll tell you something, and I promise I will keep to it. I learned this in my first boss. I am not afraid of what I don't know. I'm afraid of what I think I know. I don't know enough of the inner workings of this issue. I do know that our Attorney General legal opinion. I have heard criticisms of that opinion, and I haven't gone through enough of the analysis myself to land on what would I tell the legislature. But your question underscores the importance of this job. This is the legal advisor for our state that can render legal opinions on a range of issues, as accessible as sports gambling, as arcane as water law, and those legal opinions matter to our state. We need a lawyer, a chief lawyer, who both has the values, caring about protecting people, but also the legal expertise and the leadership experience to set up the discussions in a thoughtful, careful way. Because like we talked about with this Martinez case, if you set things up in a not so thoughtful, not so careful way, you can create a lot of brain damage. And one thing that business has told me again and again, we need to know what the rules are. We need the rules to be done in a thoughtful, fair, transparent way so we can plan. What we can't have is all this back and forth and all this uncertainty. And when people don't put in the work to do rigorous, careful analysis, you set yourself up to sometimes later say, ooh, I guess I didn't really know this issue well enough, and I kind of just took a knee-jerk position that maybe I shouldn't have. And what I'm telling you is I'm committed to thoughtful, careful analysis so that we don't end up in that box.
Thank you for sharing your views here at the midway point. And I don't know if this is a seventh inning stretch here, but as we enter into our first break here, thank you. You're joining us for Election Watch 2018. Our candidate today, Phil Weiser, Democratic candidate for Attorney General. Stay with us after the break. We're going to get into water law, data breach, talking about the role of the office, your views on the offices, what's working in the office, what changes you'd like to see in that office as we continue to explore these important statewide races here in the state of Colorado with our partner, the Denver Business Journal, and Ed Seelever. Stay with us after the break. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for staying with us here on Connect and Collaborate, the voice of the Colorado Business Roundtable. I'm Jeff Wazen, president of the COBRT, filling in for Alex, but also pinch hitting in my two roles here as partner with the Denver Business Journal on Election Watch 2018, and we're talking with Phil Weiser, Democrat opponent for Attorney General.
And you started a little bit into the idea of water law. This is a very serious issue. I think one that's far more serious than most people contemplate in the role of the AG. How do you look at this, both with the challenges that we potentially face from California and Arizona in regard to our water supply? I mean, how do you view the role of the AG as defending water law here?
The first point to note, this is a little bit of a theme with the oil and gas. You've got two types of lawyers: creative problem-solving lawyers who work on issues before they explode, or lawyers who wait till the explosion and litigate after the fact. Most businesses I know, they want the first type of lawyer. They want the lawyer who helps put them in a situation that their business is in a better situation, so they don't end up with the after-the-fact litigation. Litigation is a valuable check when things have gone off the rails. If we are in litigation around water, we're off the rails. Talk to the water community here in Colorado. The last thing they want to see us doing is litigating with surrounding states fighting over water. Here is the message. If we end up in that situation, chances are we've already lost and we're heading in a bad place. The Colorado River, a major, major source of water, is on a trend line from which we will soon be told, you got to stop using the same amount of water you've been using. And this, by the way, just look at the level in the reservoirs in Lake Powell and Lake Mead. We're not prepared for that. Number one job is to start preparing for that. The guidelines that govern how we manage the Colorado River water that we're allowed, they're going to expire soon enough. We have to start renegotiating them, replanning them. This is a statewide challenge. Again, not only is there the threat of litigating with other states, there's a threat that we're fighting amongst ourselves. Western Slope versus Eastern Plains, Western Slope versus Front Range. Here's my answer. And this is the answer of the Colorado Water Plan. It's the answer of the Colorado water community. We're innovators here in Colorado. We can be an international leader on how we manage water. We've got to start thinking about what gets called demand-side management. Another word is conservation. We've got to start thinking about how we reuse water. When you build new housing, you can use gray water for certain things, not potable, so you don't drink it, but think about all the ways we use water, whether it's gardening or whether it's in a toilet. We should be reusing water. We shouldn't be using fresh potable water for those purposes. Israel has done incredible work on that. They keep reusing water. And finally, storage. When you acknowledge climate change is happening, and I went to the Colorado Water Congress, and I talked to lots of people, and I said, what % of people here deny that climate change is happening and call it propaganda? They said maybe about 1 to 2%. Because look at the level of snowpack, which has been the way we've historically stored water, our natural storage, if you will. It's gone way down. It's not turning around, which means we've got to be smart about looking for the storage opportunities. Those are important tools, and managed appropriately, so can be reasonable alternative transfer mechanisms. But these opportunities need to be managed and watched, because at their worst, we see buy and dry situations, like happened in Crowley County, where 92% of their water rights were sold, and the communities there dried up with terrible consequences. So this is one of the most important issues an Attorney General faces. The way we face it is proactively, with engaged, innovative leadership, bring people together to solve problems. That's what we do here in Colorado. That's how we can lead on water in all sorts of ways that will make us an international leader, because we face this issue here in Colorado. We're not alone in this, but I believe we're positioned to do it better than anywhere else in the world.
And just before we move on to another subject, so, I mean, you've called for this proactive action. What are 1 or 2 things that you would like to see done? I mean, and keeping in mind in your role as AG, or maybe in your bully pulpit as AG.
Correct. So there is ongoing discussions in key forums. So the one is we have a water conservation board here in Colorado. And we need our AG at the table. Our current Attorney General, I know you promised this is coming, literally doesn't show up. She's not actively engaged, let alone proactive on this issue. She's leaning back, waiting for something bad to happen to require attention. That's not acceptable. We have to be engaged at the table and start working out these demand-side management issues in a thoughtful, fair way where our whole state works together to figure this out. Because it's not like we can look and say, well, we're not sure what's going to happen. No, we know we've got to be smarter in how we manage water. Now, all the details about how we raise revenue to build different infrastructure and build different safeguards, I don't have all those answers. But I do know that if we plan ahead and we're thoughtful and careful, we are going to get through this. There's a lot of work that went into establishing the framework for the Colorado Water Plan, but that doesn't just automatically keep going forward. It takes leadership. And what the Colorado Water Congress has been about is encouraging that leadership, that spirit of collaboration. That's how I'll approach this issue as Attorney General.
Facebook just made news literally today around some more breaches in data and access. Phil, how do you handle threats and these breaches to data, not only on the consumer side, the business side, but government side as well?
So a lot there. Let me start with Facebook. When people heard the first shoe, Cambridge Analytica accessing 87 million Facebook users drop, They thought, that's really bad. How did they let this happen? And Facebook had a feature by which they gave Cambridge Analytica access to people's accounts. Turns out today was the second shoe, a different feature that Facebook had that gave rise to 50 million users potentially having had compromised accounts. When you have data that's personal about people, you have a responsibility to manage it. This is something that has come up in multiple different ways. Let me mention another high-profile case, Equifax. Equifax has all this data that they have whenever any of us gets a loan. We actually have Equifax telling people about us. Our Social Security number, for example. Equifax failed to take reasonable measures to protect data, which was then hacked, enabling widespread potential identity theft and putting a lot of people in real concern about what's going to happen to their data. Identity theft has been and has been the largest growing crime in the U.S. What an AG needs to do is on several different fronts. First, we in Colorado just passed a law, which is going to be enforced by the Attorney General, about data storage and how we manage data security. That's an important opportunity to give businesses clear guidance up front. Here's what's expected of you. Back to this theme about an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We need our Attorney General actively making sure that businesses who are subject to these requirements know what they are, working with them collaboratively and thoughtfully so they can comply with the law and avoid these problems. When things do happen, whether it's Facebook, Equifax, or what have you, Target, another one of the cases, and the underlying problem is, oh, sorry, we didn't bother to use reasonable measures. We had an open wireless network. We failed to adopt a patch that we knew we needed to. At that point, there is, under both federal and sometimes, now with Colorado, state liability. One question many people have is, are our federal agencies abdicating responsibility? This goes back to an early conversation you had about how do we think about the relationship with the states and the feds. And one way is the states are a check on the feds. If the feds aren't following the law, the states can actually sue, so you need to follow the law. But there's a second one, which is the enforcement. If you don't get enforcement at the federal level, so think about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which had been very active under Rich Cordray. Now, under Nick Mulvaney, there's a lot of concern. They're literally shutting up shop. States are an alternative and sometimes very effective mode of enforcement. So there's an investigation of Equifax right now by state AGs. There already is one about Facebook with Cambridge Analytica. I'm not going on a limb here to say this issue today sounds like it may also warrant some careful scrutiny. Businesses need to know that if they are reckless and irresponsible in how they collect, manage, and store data, and people get hurt, that's not okay. And that's something that the Federal Trade Commission is involved in, an organization I've been involved with. I was Obama's lead overseer of the Federal Trade Commission after he was elected. It's something that state AGs are involved in.
Switching topics here, you mentioned healthcare early on, and you've talked a little bit about trying to protect against the federal government using methods other than a new law to roll back protections against preconditions. What in general, though, is the role of the AG in healthcare in this state? Where do you see yourself stepping in to protect people if you are the AG, and where is it inappropriate for the AG to step in?
Let me go through a few different levers here. The first one we talked about, which is the Affordable Care Act, making sure it's enforced effectively. Second, we need to make sure we have competition in healthcare. There are parts of our state, Grand Junction, for example, that has one insurance provider on the exchange. There are rising healthcare costs in areas around our state. If we can get competition, and it can be multiple different forms. So think about urgent care sites, or think about a technology-enabled solution like Doctors on Demand, telemedicine. That provides real competitive pressure that can bring costs down. Where there are barriers to entry, anti-competitive arrangements, and there are multiple different kinds. We can go deep on this. Antitrust and competition is part of my background. I want to be an AG who steps in to fight for competition, fights for new entry, which helps consumers. Also, related, I want to fight for innovation, because healthcare innovation is another way we can help consumers. Access to people's electronic healthcare records is required under federal law. But here's a term that some lawyers use, a requirement that's often followed in the breach, which means it's not followed. And if that isn't followed, then you don't get the benefit of innovation. If you get electronic access to your health records, there's a lot of benefit you can get to understand your own healthcare needs. I want to fight for innovation in healthcare. I also want to fight for protecting consumers against these unfair charges that happen. We passed a law recently in Colorado requiring more transparency, and existing consumer protection law says you don't get to, as a business, tell someone, don't worry about it, your insurance is going to cover it, and then after they get treated, say, oh, here's your $100,000 bill. That's not a hypothetical. That happened in Texas. Could have happened here. I don't want to let that happen. I want to make sure consumers don't get these deceptive and, in this case, really quite surprising fees. I'll use consumer protection to protect people against that in healthcare. And then finally, you said, what's a inappropriate role? I don't get to write healthcare law. That's what Congress does. That's what the state legislature does. I get to work with the tools we have. And one of the points I would leave you with, whether it's healthcare, water, or oil and gas, we have a lot of important tools to protect the people of Colorado. My criticism with Cynthia Kaufman, I know you said this was coming, I see a lot of those tools aren't being used. We need an attorney general who's a lawyer for the people, protecting their rights as consumers, as patients in the case of healthcare, as citizens in the case of civil rights. That's what I will do as your attorney general.
Well, let's get right there, yeah, because we're going to talk about that soon. Ed, fire away.
Okay, I want to go back to one thing.
I know, Ed wants to go.
You have a very interesting point here where you said where there are barriers to entry. I want to step in and fight for competition. Are there, and I know you look at everything thoroughly before you go for it, but are there barriers to entry you see right now? What kind of things could the AG be proactively doing that it's not?
Let me give you two examples. In some parts of our state, I have heard suggestions. Now, this is a point, I haven't done the investigation yet, so this is sort of, let's call it a concern that's worth investigating. There's what's called most favored nation clauses. And what that says is, I'm going to promise you, insurance company or hospital, if it's in the inverse, that I'm going to give you the best rate I have with anybody. That can make a new entrant put in a tough situation, because whoever they're trying to contract with, whatever side of the market they're on, whether they're a provider or whether they're an insurance company, the other contractor says, I'd love to give you some sort of interesting, experimental, new opportunity, but I can't because I'll have to cut the same deal with this other incumbent provider. That's a real concern. Other states, particularly Blue Cross, Blue Shield, who'd been dominant in other states, used to use it. Antitrust authorities in other states have gone after it. So that would be one type of barrier to entry. Here's another. Let's pretend a community has one major hospital, and only one. If that hospital has an exclusive dealing arrangement with one insurance plan, good luck being the rival insurance plan who enters and doesn't have access to that hospital. This is an important point. We have competition laws, antitrust laws, but if they're not enforced, then consumers and innovators don't get the benefit. I can promise all Coloradans, you elect me as your Attorney General, I'll protect your rights to competition, I'll protect your rights as a consumer.
Good. Picking up on the theme around the current AG, Cynthia Kaufman, and her office, what requires changing? What do you feel is being underutilized in the current AG's office?
Let me offer 4 different dimensions. First is overly political decision making. Second is substantive engagement leaning in. Third is professional lawyering. And fourth is community engagement. I give different grades on each of them, but I can say on all 4, I'm going to seek to do better. Number 1, overly political decision making. I can't explain this lawsuit against Boulder County on any ground other than politics. You don't do it. You don't sue someone without talking to them first. It is not okay. And I don't care if I disagree violently with someone. I owe everybody the duty to sit down first. I also believe that if I have the chance to take on an issue that's about principle, take gerrymandering, for example. I don't care if it's a Democratic gerrymander or Republican gerrymander. We need a lawyer for the people who puts principle above party. Cynthia Kaufman actually tried to get rid of the head of the Republican Party while she was Attorney General, which is so flatly a political act and so inappropriate for an Attorney General. So I am not going to be about partisan political games. I'm going to be about the rule of law and elevating principle, because we need to build more trust in the rule of law. Number 2, substantive engagement, and here my background in innovation is going to be clearly on my mind. Whatever the issue is, healthcare, water, oil and gas, data breaches, I'm never going to settle for how have we always done this. Too often, government isn't about Republicans or Democrats. It's about inertia. How have we always done this? And if you do nothing as the leader, autopilot controls, inertia controls. What everyone needs to know, whether you're a community group or whether you're a business or a government agency asking for legal advice from the AG's office, I start from the principle, what's the best way to do this for the people of Colorado? And if it's different than what we've been doing it, let's consider how we do better. And that's going to be a spirit of engagement, which will mean I will always be asking us to think harder and differently and arrive at the best solution we can. Number 3, and I'm going to forget which one I said before. It was 3, which is 4.
Waiting for a Rick Perry moment.
Yeah.
Professional lawyer.
Yeah, no, I got it. Professional lawyering. There has been times when Cynthia Kaufman has refused to provide professional legal advice to John Hickenlooper's administration because they have different political views. And this obviously relates to the first point, but it's different. I have a clear responsibility. It's to every person in Colorado, every governmental entity. We need to give professional, high-quality legal advice. That is our true north. If it's Governor Walker Stapleton, he will get the best high-quality professional legal advice I can give him. If it's a Republican county commissioner, if it's an independent district attorney, when they say, what does the law require on this, I'm not going to fudge or anything. I'm going to give them professional legal advice. That's super important for this office. And then finally, community engagement. We are of the people, by the people, for the people. That's how Lincoln defined democracy. Here I'll give Cynthia Kaufman some props. She established an office of community engagement, which was an important step. I want not only to have such an office, I want to infuse that spirit throughout the entire office. Of all 500 people, I want to have people living across the state telecommuting, so a distributed workforce, and I want to make sure I take the front range-based workforce on the road, so we're getting to know communities and their issues. That's how I operate as a dean of CU Law School. I went to places in Colorado that no dean had ever gone before. That's how I've been as a candidate. That's how I'll be as Attorney General.
And those are 4 ways you point out that the office is run. What about issues? So, I mean, is there an area, other than the ones that we've discussed, that you don't feel Kaufman has dove into that you want to shine more light on, you want to pay more attention to?
See if I can come up with 3 of them. Number 1, broadband. When I travel the whole state, an issue I've heard again and again, communities, Silverton, Craig, Colorado, terrified about a lack of access to broadband. When Routt County was building a broadband network, they told me they didn't get quality legal advice. They got bureaucratic BS from the Attorney General's office. They didn't get engaged. I want to be engaged providing high-quality legal counsel, whether it's on public-private contracts, whether it's on land use issues and rights of way, whether it's on regulations. The legal expertise of the AG's office needs to be provided on broadband, both to local levels, but also to the state legislature, which passed a new law on broadband and got 0 engagement or guidance from the AG's office. So the office has been missing in action on broadband. I would change it. On healthcare, the issues I mentioned on that agenda, the office has also been missing in action. And then finally, on the civil rights issues I talked about before, separating families at the border, asking people on the census their immigration status, our AG's office has been missing in action, not standing up for people's civil rights. I won't sit down on those issues. I will be committed to defending the rights of everybody.
You've talked a little bit about the role of the state legislature and certainly the governor's race that's playing out at the same time your race is. Let's talk a little bit about the relationship. You certainly have a new Senate president, a new Speaker of the House coming in, new governor. How do you see yourself interacting, if elected, with the legislative body in the governor's office on the first floor?
Let me double down, because I want to have relationships with leaders also at the local level too, county commissioners, district attorneys. First, you show up, you listen. You make clear that our office is here to help and support you. What gives the Attorney General's office the power, credibility, and respect is when it does careful work, when it listens, and people know that you're not about a partisan agenda. George Jepsen, who's the Attorney General in Connecticut, said to me, that's how he approached it, and he built up credibility. So after a while, even the Republicans said when he weighed in on an issue and gave a legal opinion, people knew they could trust it. I've mentioned before some of my concerns about Cynthia Kaufman being overly political. I know I need to build credibility, and I need to build respect among all sorts of actors. In some cases, because the AG's office hasn't been there to support the legislature, there's a little bit of a where are you or where you been, and so I've got to make up for that. So I'm going to put in the work. I recognize my role is as a supporting player to serve I don't ever care about getting credit on things. My goal is to get better outcomes for the people of Colorado. So when I work on water issues with the county commission, or I work on bail reform with the district attorney and sheriff, or I work with the state legislature on broadband, I want them to get better outcomes for the people of Colorado. And I trust that in the long term, if you have a service-first mindset about how do I help and work well with people, it will all come back to help everybody.
And we've spent the better part of 57 minutes talking about how you'd be different than Cynthia Kaufman. For the listeners who are deciding here, how would a Phil Weiser Attorney General's office be different than a George Brockler Attorney General's office?
It's important. Part of what's been challenging about this campaign, George Brockler hasn't been fulsome in discussing his agenda or priorities. If you look at the primary message, elect a prosecutor, you have a problem. The office does relatively modest criminal prosecution. We've been here for 57 minutes talking about a range of issues, from water to sports gambling to oil and gas to healthcare to broadband. Criminal prosecution happens, mostly white-collar crime, but it's a modest part. So I'd like to hear more about George's substantive priorities on issues. Now, a few of them have come up. We had a debate where he said he's against Roe versus Wade, so I know that's one of his priorities. But I don't know on a lot of the issues what we're talking about. And what's important to note is if you say, I don't have a view on water, I'll wait till the legislature acts, I view that as an abdication of responsibility. Or I don't have a view on the opioid litigation and providing more drug treatment, then you're keeping Colorado on the sidelines of a critical issue and opportunity. So I'd like to hear more of the substantive views that George Brockler has, because the line, we need a prosecutor, is not describing the job we're seeking. Now, he's been a criminal prosecutor for his whole career, so I understand why he would seek to describe the job that way. But as our conversation underscores, that's not the job.
Phil, you've done a great job kind of discussing kind of your ideas, your platform, your ideologies as you look at this race and explaining your pitch to the voters. For the last minute, tell the voters how to find you, how to find out more about your campaign, your views, and maybe even to open their wallets and write a check.
philforcolorado.com is my website. And back to your last point, Ed, look at my website, look at George Brockler's website. That's how people can decide. I have laid out clearly all of my issues on everything we've talked about. Not sports gambling, because I haven't landed on exactly what I would say on that. But if people have questions for me, my website and Facebook, Phil for Colorado on Facebook, please follow us, see our updates. I'm on Twitter, Instagram. We want to interact with the voters. I want to hear about your thoughts, your concerns. We've gone and shown up lots of parts of the state. Hopefully people have met me and know me. But you can get to know me. We've got videos up there. We've got lots of content. This is an important time for our democracy, for citizens to get engaged, to get informed. We cannot have people thinking this is a spectator sport. Everyone has a chance to be engaged. If they're motivated to contribute, that's great. If they can volunteer, that's great. Mostly, I want people informed, educated, and talking to the people. This job may be the most important job in state government that people don't understand. It's such a powerful tool. It has 500 people. It can do so much for the people of Colorado. I want people to get to know me as a lawyer for the people of Colorado. We've got a lot to work on together. Thanks for helping educate voters.
Thank you for that. And that's exactly why we're here doing our Election Watch 2018 with the Denver Business Journal. Thanks for joining us today. Have an incredible Colorado weekend. Go Rockies. Tune in next week. Thank you.